Hi guys, Sifu Mark here. And before we get into the interview, I'd very much appreciate if you could hit that like button, press the subscribe so you can support the channel. Today's chat is with the publisher of KungFuMagazine.com. He's also a regular staff writer at YMAA Publications. He has written numerous articles on the subject of Chinese martial arts and has been involved in them since childhood. Having won awards in disciplines like fencing, he then progressed into Wing Lam's Northern Shaolin Kung Fu and later became a 32nd generation disciple under Shaolin Master Shi De Cheng. Please welcome Sifu Gene Ching. How are you, sir?
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be with you here today.
Hey, thank you very much for agreeing to come on, sir. I know you're an absolutely busy individual. You know, you had to figure me into your schedule, sir. So I'm very, very appreciative of that. So let's go ahead and get into the interview. Sifu, how did you get started into the martial arts?
Well, you know, it was kind of a family thing, to be honest. Being Chinese, one of my cousins was involved in Kung Fu. And when I was a child, he came by with his team and they stayed at our house. They were going to some tournament. And it was just impressive to see that what they were doing and their level of energy. And I must have been 5, 4 at the time, and it really left a big impression. I remember I had like this toy sword as a kid, and if there's one thing you got to know about my pursuit of the martial arts is I'm very oriented to swords. That's been the driving force of my discipline, is I love the sword arts. And so I had this toy sword, and they broke it right away because it was a toy sword. And then they showed me their sword, and it was just like, ooh, what is that? You know, and that kind of sparked the fire. But my paternal grandfather, who I never met, was allegedly a martial artist. And I've had other martial artists in my family, just being Asian. Most of my family is from Hawaii, and a lot of them had Kung Fu backgrounds or other martial arts. My granduncle was a big Aikido guy. And so, you know, I would say a lot of it was cultural, especially because I was brought up in a predominantly white community and had very little connection to Asian culture beyond, you know, Godzilla movies and Kung Fu movies. And, you know, Mr. Sulu on Star Trek, there wasn't a lot. And so it was very reaffirming, you know, to grow up in that culture, to be part of that culture. You know, it's really what opened up Asian culture for me, because once I got involved in the martial arts, I started reading about the philosophies. I started pursuing it a lot more and learning about the arts, and particularly with Chinese Kung Fu, it's so interconnected that, you know, once you reach a certain level of practice, you have to engage the culture to really progress. And you know, we evoke our forms, evoke the names of classic books and operas, and, you know, particular art forms. So it's all really like a big Chinese banquet. You know, you just sample all sorts of things as you're learning, right? So didn't expect it to become a career, but there you have it.
All right. So you had said you're very oriented towards to using tools, using the sword, correct? Mm-hmm. So what led you towards that, if you don't mind, and into fencing, if you don't mind?
Yeah, I've done fencing. I've done kendo. I do iaido now. I hold a provost master in degree in fencing that I don't use at all. I haven't touched a fencing sword in years, but I was a NC2A athlete fencing in college. You know, it's a good question why I am into swords, and I have this one memory that I've always cited as sort of my formative reason for it. When I was a little kid, I had a hernia, and I was hospitalized for that. And it was the first time that I was away from my parents, because they wouldn't let parents stay with their kids back then. And I remember being, and this was like 3 or 4, I don't know, very young age. And I remember there was like this mural on the wall of Peter Pan and Captain Hook. And when all the lights were out, the light from the parking lot shone up on the image of Captain Hook, and it was kind of bearing down on me, you know. And it wasn't a frightening image, really, but the whole experience of having the operation and being a kid in the hospital alone was you know, traumatic to some degree. And I've done a lot of sort of reflection on why I got so obsessed by swords, and that kind of sticks out as my earliest sort of sword memory. And so perhaps it was this weird trauma I had after an operation. I don't know. I mean, in terms of effectiveness in the modern day, you know, unfortunately I can't carry a sword everywhere I go. So it is an esoteric discipline. You know, it's not. I don't know that I do it for self-defense as much as I do it for just the love of it. You know. I mean, to some degree, that's true with all ancient weapons, right? I mean, sure, there's practicality, and people will say, well, you could use an umbrella or a cane or whatever and use those techniques. Yeah, sure. That, you know, but I'm not a big guy, so I'm a tool user. You know, got to level that playing field. You know what I mean?
I definitely understand. That. So I definitely do see how a childhood memory of what you say, Captain Hook with a sword, that being one of the earliest memories of a sword, how that can affect you, getting you to be involved with the sword later in life. I do see that. That's absolutely awesome. Now, what's also funny about that, I just thought about this. Captain Hook, the type of sword that he used, right, just so happens to be the type of sword that I read a little bio on you before, and it said that you have 2 degrees in actual fencing, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's the same type of sword that Captain Hook uses, isn't it?
Well, sort of. I mean, Captain Hook uses like a naval cutlass, right? Like the pirate sword, and I guess that's close to a saber, but a saber really wasn't my weapon. There are 3 weapons in fencing: foil, epee, saber. And foil descends from the court foil, which was a personal sidearm. And saber descends from cavalry saber. So that's the curved blade. You can use the edge. The other epee and foil, you can only use the point. And epee descends from the dueling rapier. And one of the things I think you need to understand about fencing, the modern art of fencing, that a lot of people miss is that it derived from dueling. So it's a little different than a lot of other martial arts because it's very one-dimensional. It's only designed to deal with one opponent. Whereas you look at like some kung fu styles or various other styles, various Okinawan styles, you're facing multiple opponents. You know, your former kata might go different directions. You know, fencing is not that at all. It's descends directly from dueling, and so there's sort of there's parameters to it that keep it more confined. Or it's not battlefield tactics. You know, it's not street fighting. It's a much more specific form of combat, right?
Okay. So if you don't mind me asking, right, with fencing being a specific type of combat, right, more one-on-one, really, mm-hmm. Would it be a different mindset that you would have to do while you're practicing kung fu? And if so, how did you find that transition from fencing to going into Northern Shaolin?
Oh, it was very positive, actually. I mean, one of the faults, and I've been very outspoken about this in the past with Chinese martial arts, is we have one of the most beautiful and most diverse arsenal of weapons of any martial arts style, but we don't fight with them. We don't spar with them very much. I mean, some schools do, but not very much. And so a lot of the techniques in our forms have been lost or confused because people just aren't sparring. You know, not only they aren't sparring, they aren't cutting. So they really don't know how to use a blade, you know, and I've seen I don't want to name anybody, but I've seen countless kung fu masters who I respect for their, you know, for their lineage and their skill and everything. but clearly they've never cut with a sword because the way they use it, they're not cutting, they're just kind of waving it around. It's a very different process from when, I'm actually trying to slice somebody with an edge or chop or what have you, versus where I'm just kind of shadowboxing with it. And one of the things that fencing gave me in terms of kung fu was that whole sense of sparring, that whole sense of point. I find the traditional kung fu sets for sword are brilliant. They're really brilliant, but they're also, like any kung fu form, they're super dense, and then you can kind of grab the skin of it, get the surface of it, but you really need to kind of dig at it and work with it and study it for years before some of the what some people would call hidden techniques, but some of the less obvious techniques emerge, right? And there's a lot to be said for that dialogue of steel on steel, that's very unique to Western fencing, in that we do use steel blades. They have this term called, pardon my French, sentiment du fer, so the feel of the steel, right? And that is very distinct. If you work with wooden weapons and versus working for metal weapons, it's different. There's a different feel to it. And especially when you're doing contact and doing stuff against the blade, very different feel. And so a lot of the rather subtle techniques of fencing in terms of actions on the blade and such, I would discover doing my tien set, doing my straight sword set. It's like, oh, wow, this is kind of the same thing. I need to do this form with that mindset, like I would be if I was fencing and sparring. So on the whole, it was very positive. I think the only negative thing is, I'm a dominant right hand person, and I fenced right hand, and it's very right handed. And kung fu is also tends to lean towards the right, and so it became unbalanced for me. So I kind of had to stop fencing because I kept blowing out my elbow, and it's just tennis elbow, fencing elbow, swordsman elbow, same sort of injury, repeated stress on the right arm. But on the whole, I'm a staunch advocate of cross training, within different martial styles, because everybody has a piece. Iaido, Kendo, Eskrima, Kung Fu, everybody has a piece of it. And we don't really work with swords anymore. Outside of the Wushu or dojo or whatever you're working. So reestablishing that connection, I find it's really important to just sample everything and get a little taste and see what they got and see what they're on about, because everybody's preserving a chunk of it, and it's all valuable.
Definitely is. I understand that, and I agree with that comment. It definitely all is valuable. So, if you don't mind me asking, Sifu, how did you get into Northern Shaolin? It was Wing Lam's, Sifu Wing Lam's Chuan, correct?
Yep. Wing Lam was my primary and most influential Sifu. I was looking for sword schools when I was like in junior high school. I was looking for sword schools. When I was really young, I started in judo because that was what was available. I was living back east. And then when I came out here, I tried to do judo again, but I wound up with this sort of judo Shotokan hybrid. Didn't really work out for me, so I left the school. And then at some point decided, well, I really want to pursue swordsmanship. And Wing Lam School at that time was in this sort of industrial complex, car repair place next door and sign painting place next door. And so he just had this space and had that just glorious weapons rack of, Chinese martial arts around the altar, all those great pole arms and 3-sectional staves and swords. And I remember walking into that place and just going, when do I get those? When am I going to play with those? And they're all like, oh, you don't even get a staff for a year. I'm like, okay, I'm still in, I don't care. Just get me to those eventually. And I don't know. I still have such love for the Chinese arsenal because it's so imaginative and so exotic. Certainly we have our, swords are swords, staves are staves, spears are spears. But then you get like Guandao and some of these other crazy weapons, 3-sectional staff. They're just it's just a lot of fun. It's a lot of really interesting and colorful, you know.
Nice. And then later, after being with Wing Lam for quite a while, you then how did you become a student of Master Shi De Cheng?
Okay, so 1995 is when they celebrated the 1500th anniversary of the founding of Shaolin Temple. And I'd heard about that, and I was that just seemed like a moment in history that I wanted to participate in. And so I actually had the good fortune to get in contact with Matthew Polly, who wrote American Shaolin. He also wrote a great book on Bruce Lee and a great book on MMA. But this is before he'd written anything, and he was leading tours. And so, you know, I figured I got to go to Shaolin Temple. It still exists. I got to see what that's about. And so Wing Lam's form of Shaolin, which is called Northern Shaolin often, or Baxiu Lum in the Cantonese, it allegedly left the temple centuries ago. You know, we cite Ganfeng Chi, who's like this mythical, not mythical, he was a real person, but a legendary character kind of like Wong Fei Long, or even as Ip Man has become, you know, just as the stories of him, the folklore have blown up way beyond human proportions, superhuman proportions. But so it's been a couple centuries outside of the temple, and it had other influences into it. But it became very prominent in Guangdong and Hong Kong. And the early immigrants from China, including Wing Lam, were from Hong Kong, Guangdong. And so this form of Shaolin was what came out first, and what most of the practitioners of Shaolin Kung Fu were basing their stuff on, at least in the Americas, as you know, in the 60s, 70s, 80s. It doesn't come out till later, till the 90s, where Shaolin Temple starts coming into its own recognition internationally, where China had opened up enough, and people started going to Shaolin Temple and realizing that they have their own curriculum. Now I've shown, you know, when my first journey to Shaolin Temple was kind of this personal mission to find that connection between what I've been practicing and what, you know, what this temple is propounding. And I never found like a form that was like, oh yeah, that's our form. But I did demonstrate a lot of the forms for the monks, and they're all like, oh yeah, this is clearly Shaolin influenced. You know, this clearly has the same elements, same components, and it's just different. And you got to keep in mind, you know, 1500 years of history. That's a lot of room for a diaspora to spread out, for variation and evolution. I mean, they say, you know, Shaolin is the cradle of martial arts, right? It's the symbolic birthplace of all martial arts. And while that's an apocryphal statement, it's not quite valid historically. It's certainly valid in a symbolic sense. And it still is such a huge environment. It's so complex, so many people practicing around Shaolin Temple, so much different stuff being practiced, that you know, it's hard to encapsulate into one style. But there definitely is a curriculum that the temple is now propounding as its, you know, this is our official stuff. This is what we're claiming as our legacy. And I think that's great. It's just exciting to be alive during a time, you know, when the temple isn't burnt out by by the Qing dynasty or something, you know. It's exciting to watch it come back. And I feel very grateful that I was able to bear witness to, and I'm still watching it grow and expand, you know. It's an amazing time to be practicing that style. And I practice both now. Wing Lam's Baxiu Lam is Northern Shaolin, as well as some of the Shaolin stuff, the Shaolin Temple forms.
Mm-hmm.
They fit together so nice.
Sorry, go ahead.
They fit together very nicely. You know, it feels
that
like
was what I was about to ask. That was literally what I was about to ask. So they do fit together.
Oh
All
yes,
right,
that's
cool, cool. And I think that's really cool that you could demonstrate Northern Shaolin for the monks and they could actually converse to you and tell you, yeah, I can see the influence. I can see how it is Shaolin, how it comes from Shaolin and all of that, the origin of it.
yeah. And since
That's
then,
absolutely awesome.
many of my my martial family, my Boxulam family, have done the same thing. I've gone and worked with the Shaolin monks, and we've all gotten the same reaction, from different monks, different generations, and anybody that does both systems, that we get the connection. It just flows together very nicely, you know.
Understand. That is absolutely awesome. That is awesome. So, if you don't mind me asking, Sifu Ching, is Northern Shaolin Boxilum a practical fighting style?
Absolutely. I mean, but what style's going to say they are? But I mean, I think one of my Sibach, one of my martial uncles, says you've got to have iron palm to make Buxilum work, because one of our great grandmaster Gui Zhong was a big iron palm guy, and I get that. I get what he's saying about that. The other major challenge with Buxilum is it requires a lot of leg, and I'm pushing 60, and I can't be doing any of those flying kicks anymore. At least not to the not to an effective quality. Now it's just trying to stay limber, but um a lot of with kung fu in particular, and this is sort of a global statement, to make it effective in combat is mostly reductionalism, right? In that, we have the punches, we have the kicks, we have the elbow strikes, we have the headbutts, we have every technique, and it's just being able to take those individual techniques out of the forms and use them applicatively, right? Now, what tends to happen, to a fault, because kung fu has such elaborate forms and so many forms, that we just kind of get caught up in the forms and we neglect those basic, just how to throw a punch, right? And so that's why I think kung fu gets a lot of bad rap, because a lot of people, they practice it, for health and for fun, which is great. But then they get kind of misguided and miss, those applicative qualities of it. And that's not to say that everybody does that. I mean, there are plenty of authentic kung fu people that are excellent fighters. So the one thing that the one thing that the diversity of kung fu gives its practitioners is you can go at whatever level you want. You can pull out whatever you want to pull out of it if you spend the time and train it. If you want to be a fighter, you can focus on those fighting techniques. If you want to be a dancer, you can focus on that. If you want to be a swordsman, you can focus on that. It's all there. It's almost like it's so much that it tends to overwhelm a lot of people, and they never get a focus, and therein just kind of becomes sort of a jack of all trades, master of none, right? But I mean, at least you're getting some exercise, right? So it's all good. I mean, the Shaolin monks tend to take the philosophy, and I'm a Zen Buddhist as myself, that it's really the ultimate goal of kung fu, of Shaolin kung fu, isn't self-defense in that little sense, isn't fighting, but it's Chan, it's Zen. And so it's this level of awareness, it's this being in the moment, and that I firmly believe in. Doing the forms are moving meditations. We think of meditation as sitting and being, all still. But if you really understand the Zen mind, Zen is present all the time. So you could be doing Zen while you're still, or doing Zen when you're flailing around with a sword. It's no difference. And that is at the heart of what I think Shaolin Kung Fu is about. It's warrior Zen. It's we're not. Well, I mean, there's stillness in moments, but we're actually doing quite the opposite, but still getting to the same place, hopefully.
Nice, nice. And it's very, very, very awesome that you had just said that, the goal of Shaolin Kung Fu is Zen, is to get Zen, right?
Yeah.
Now, my question to you then is, what do you believe is the hardest part of developing Kung Fu?
It's the stamina. It's the endurance. It's and that, by that I don't mean being able to work out for 2 hours or 3 hours at a time. By that I mean being able to do it, to adopt it as a lifestyle. I remember talking to Master Dennis Brown, who's a prominent American pioneer in modern wushu, actually. And we were talking about martial arts, and he was saying that he always kind of disdained when people said they were martial artists but weren't practicing. You know, for him, if you claim to be a martial artist, you have to be practicing. You couldn't have been like a martial artist 10 years ago and still call that, or even, you know, if you don't have a practice, you're not a martial artist. You know, it's just like if you don't play music, you're not a musician. You know, you have to do it, and you have to see it through your whole life. And you know, I mean, a lot of people drop out when they start losing their physicality, and to me, that's the worst time, because that's when you really get into it. You know, when you start getting older, when your body, you start losing that physical, that youthful springiness, and being able to heal quickly, and you know, having the stamina and what have you. You know, that's when the Kung Fu is most critical. And when you really, it's when it just keeps getting harder is the thing, right? But in terms of, it's that longevity, you know, I mean, I've been, this is like, God, over 50 years I've been in the martial arts arena. And, you know, so many of my classmates that I competed with, that I trained and sweated with, and, you know, they all quit. Then again, there are other ones that are, you know, my age, my generation, are still going. Some are still teaching, you know, are still even competing. And I love that, you know. And ultimately, martial arts is not for everybody, because it is a difficult road. But and the hardest part is staying with it, you know, because it's gonna hand you all sorts of obstacles and challenges. Right. No matter, the more you give into it, the more harder it's going to get. Right. It's always going to oppose you. I mean, that's sort of the point. Right. And so, you know, you just got to not balk at that. And as I get older, I think it's more about, sort of an acceptance, if you will, that, you know, I can't be at the top of my game every day. But I still need to do a little bit every day, you know, just to keep it flowing. You know, I got to touch it, you know, and I got to try and get to that pinnacle as often as I can. But there's a lot of, as I get older, there's more down days. There's more days where all I do is just warm up, you know, and just kind of throw some really light forms, and then, you know, call it a day. You know, I can't really explode and express myself as I want to. But you know. Ask me again in a decade. Ask me, and we'll see where my opinion stands.
I see where we're at in a decade. I get you. I get you. But coincidentally, all of my teachers have always said the same thing. Just a little bit. All you need is just a little bit every day. Is a whole lot better than absolutely nothing.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, I do. I understand that, Sifu. And that's a really good answer. And I am 100% agree with that one. So let's go into this next one. Since you had also given how long that you've been in the martial arts or around the martial arts, that's over 50 years. That's half a century right there, Sifu. Right. So with so much experience, right? Not only as a martial artist, but you've also had a career built around martial arts, right? Yeah. So how has that training benefited your professional career?
Well, I mean, first of all, I never imagined this career. It just kind of emerged. You know, I started writing for martial arts mainly, you know, as sort of a side gig, sort of, because I was looking at the quality of articles that were being published. I started writing in the 90s, and there just wasn't a lot of really good, substantial, meaty articles. And so, and I, you know, at the same time, you know, I was training, and I was looking at, you know, I was doing all this research on culture myself, and finding all this information that I felt just needed to be shared and brought forward. And so I started writing, and eventually that wound up getting me in this position as publisher of the magazine. And that put me in a very fascinating role. It was a weird seat because, I mean, in the martial world, we all treat each other with respect. There's martial etiquette, but there's a particular face people would put on for me being the publisher, because everybody wanted to be on the cover of the magazine, right? And so that was kind of interesting. I think being a martial artist and training in the martial arts, one of the things that you learn to do quickly is to judge who you're looking at. What kind of skills do they have? If things go down, can I beat this guy? Or that's kind of that martial thing, right? You look at where their talents lie and where their weaknesses lie. And I think being able to, because I was literally bombarded by all these martial artists trying to get press, and I respect that. I gave press to people that had something to talk about other than themselves, and being able to read people was incredibly powerful, and also just as a publisher, as a writer, I would feel inauthentic if I didn't have the practice. It's hard to write about stuff if you don't know it, if you're not in it. There's a lot of observations that came out of my own practice that drove a lot of my articles, still do. It's become very much part of my practice to write about it and research it and pull some sort of message out, if you will, some sort of lesson that's shareable within the context of an article. There's that whole what they say in Chinese, it's Wenwu right? Martial and scholar are one family, or are together, and I really feel that in terms of what I try to do when I'm when I'm reporting, when I'm writing about martial arts, when I'm experiencing martial arts. On the flip side, I can't take a lesson while I'm not kind of half writing in the back of my head, that'd make a good article. The hard part is that the martial arts are dynamic, and so a lot of it is very difficult to describe. You can teach me more by crossing hands with me than you ever could by talking to me. And so that notion that martial arts is taught from warm hand to warm hand, that's something that will never really be bridged by my ability to describe it in articles, but I'll try. We do what we can, right?
Oh, it's true. I definitely get that. It's much easier to describe what's going on the outside, but definitely hard to describe that feeling. That's I get you on that. So that's awesome. Being a martial artist and being able to make martial arts your career. And the funny thing about that is I find it absolutely incredible that you weren't even trying to make this your career. It just you really fell into it.
Yeah, it feels what they say in Chinese, they say yuan fen, right, which is kind of like fate or destiny. It's been very rewarding, and I wish, having been exposed to some absolutely phenomenal martial arts masters over the years, I wish I could have gleaned more from them, but my exposure to a lot of them was very limited, just trying to get that story, trying to get a couple points out. But they all had so many incredible lessons and so many things, to learn. It's such a big world. There's so much to it. And you never get to the end. I still feel that I'm at the very tip of the iceberg, and that there's this huge amount of information, below the surface that I'm still not getting at,
And that is a great analogy there, the iceberg analogy. So with that, I will ask you this question, right? If you could teach the new generation of martial artists only one thing, Sifu, it could be technique, it could be philosophy, it could be both. What would it be?
It would be compassion. And maybe that's my Shaolin Zen angle coming out. You got to remember that the word passion, the root word, is to suffer, right? And compassion means to suffer with. And so to be compassionate means that you can suffer with someone, you can sympathize, you can empathize, you can emote. And I think that's valuable on so many levels in terms of not only just sort of the street practicality that people always kind of dwell on with the martial arts, that you've got to be, and this is very Shaolin-y, if you will, but you've got to be sort of compassionate to your opponent. Not just, obviously you want to be compassionate to your sparring partners because you want them to walk away and improve, and so you can improve with them. But even somebody who be totally, somebody trying to kill you, you got to have some compassion so you know how to react. Can you give them an out so they can escape? Is that what you need to do? Do you have to end them? What do there's a lot of elements there. And then probably even more critically is that I think it's very important for martial arts to have compassion for people that don't do martial arts or are just starting martial arts. Because once you kind of go in it and get jaded and kind of like, okay, beginners, whatever. I mean, it's easy to kind of sit and troll people for their crappy martial arts, because there's a lot of crappy martial arts, because martial arts is really hard to get good at. And so, but at the same time, if you have some passion from where they're at and be encouraging and try and, instead of just trying to press everybody down, let that next generation come up and find their strengths and, get them to the point that they're open enough to be the receptacles of these teachings that you can then pass on. Because that's so much about what it's about, right? We've got this incredible art, this incredibly dense and complex and profound art, and we're all trying to get a piece of it. But at a certain point, we've got to give back, right? Because it's been given to us, we've got to pass it on. And that takes, to be a teacher, takes a lot of compassion.
Definitely. Just like you said, Sifu, that is very Zen. And you're right. You're so right. It is very Zen, and I understand it. Compassion. Can't have a better answer than that.
No, thank you.
We have to move on to another question for you, Sifu Ching. How can you be contacted?
Well, that's pretty easy. For most of the Kung Fu community, you can go to kungfumagazine.com, and there's a list of staff, and my email is there. It's actually Gene at kungfumagazine.com. I'm active on Facebook under my name. I'm active on Twitter, on LinkedIn. Instagram, I have a different name, which is a totally different thing. Jedi Knight Crew Emperor, but that's because, well, this is kind of a sideways story, but it'll relate to our discussion here. I do intense psychedelic reaction crises management at music festivals. And our crew is called the Jedi Knight Crew. It's a lot of my Kung Fu brothers and sisters. And we deal with people basically having bad drug trips. And, when we haven't met in person, but when you were introducing yourself to me, the one thing that really caught my eye was that Jamaican flag behind you and that little bit of patois I can hear, because I work a lot of reggae and, respect. But, so that's why I've got that kind of weird Instagram name, because of, I run this crew and do a lot of, music festivals. And, that's been an interesting environment to actually test my skills in that, I was not a very good competitor. I was terrible. I did some forms competitions, the sparring competitions I went in, I just got creamed. I was just never really, I was never a kickboxer. But in this situation, dealing with these bad drug trips, I mean, me and my crew have gone to people with knives, people with broken bottles, all sorts of fight, and we don't fight fair. So, it's all of us against whoever them, because we want to take them down softly. And, they can do whatever they want to us, but we just have to take them down softly. We can't use pain control. We can't punch them in the nose, but it was very reaffirming. You asked earlier whether the Shaolin techniques work. I got to test some of these things in real world situations, in real combat situations. And, I'm still standing. So they must work at least that much.
Of course. So that's how you attest to the efficacy of the techniques of Northern Shaolin. That's absolutely awesome. Thank you for that there, Sifu. Information for Sifu Gene Ching will be in the description down below. Also in the description down below will be a link for FeiYue shoes. If you need a pair of FeiYue shoes, go ahead and click the link down below. Get the best prices, get the best deals, all at FeiYue shoes.
I got to tell you a story about FeiYue shoes before we finish.
Sure, tell me, go ahead.
I was one of the first people to import them in the United States. So Matt Polly, when he did his tour thing, and he didn't know how to run tours, but he, because it was this experiment, right? One of the things he said in his thing was, you get a free pair of shoes with your tour. And what he meant was FeiYue shoes. This was 1995, before FeiYues had even really come in America. And most people that are doing modern wushu were wearing wushu shoes, but at Shaolin, all FeiYue. And once I put on a pair of FeiYue, I still wear them. I never went back. They're the best martial arts shoes. They're even a decent street shoe, So, I worked to bring them out through YMAA Enterprises. And that was one of the first major North American distributors. And then brought them out through Tiger Claw. And now it's this epic thing. I'm excited that FeiYues have come around and people understand them and, are realizing what a great freaking shoe they are,
Yes, so, it is true. It is true. I have multiple pairs of FeiYue shoes.
Yes, me too.
Multiple. And I'm so glad to actually hear that it's because of you. You're one of the reasons why we got FeiYue over here in the United States.
It would have come over at some point from somebody, but I'm
true. But
I'm glad to have done my part, I'm glad to have done my part.
That's absolutely awesome. Thank you very much for your time to speak with me, Sifu, and thank you for filling me in on little parts of history. That's absolutely awesome, man.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.